although I didn't actually hear, I think I could count on my one hand. If I heard Mr. Carney's, the Prime Minister's name, I doubt that came up more than 6 times. Mr. Trump's, the President of the United States name, came up a fair bit more.
From coast to coast to coast. These are our stories. History, culture, politics, and more. This is the VCalla Show.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the VCalla Show. I'm Vincenzo, Calla, creator of VCalla Productions, and today I'm excited to be on Parliament Hill with the MP for Bruce Grey Owen Sound, MP Alex Ruff. Alex, thanks for joining me today.
No problem, Vincenzo. I think this is the first time we're doing this in person.
First time in person. I think I was counting third or fourth time in total, so it's great to be here today. Thanks for having me on in your office on the Hill, and I'm excited today to talk a bit about the election, what happened there, and then talking a bit about what you hope to achieve in the next 4 years or less, depending how long this Parliament goes. So excited for that.
Sounds good.
So before heading into today's discussion, some of the MPs that I'm meeting with today and over the next few weeks, I want to take an opportunity to ask you a bit about the election. So what were you hearing at the doors that you're bringing with you back here?
Well, I mean, it's the same old, you know. The fact is I've been through 3 elections in less than 6 years. My rural riding hasn't, from a priorities point, hasn't really changed that much. Obviously, I'm a huge agriculture riding where, you know, farming, in particular beef and dairy, drive a lot of the economy. I am implicated with impacts to you're on Bruce riding with Bruce Power. A lot of my constituents work there. But I'm the second oldest riding, I believe, in Ontario. So seniors issues are of utmost importance, and tourism as well, because I am lucky enough to live in the most beautiful riding in all of Canada. I'm sure you hear that from a number of the deputy or MPs that you interview. But yeah, the bottom line, affordability, the cost of living, are all key issues that haven't changed. The biggest thing that was different this time around was obviously with the Liberal leadership change. Although I didn't actually hear, I think I could count on my one hand. If I heard Mr. Carney's, the Prime Minister's name, I doubt that came up more than 6 times. Mr. Trump's, the President of the United States name, came up a fair bit more. And so that was the biggest sort of, I'd say, difference between the previous 2 elections, where, you know, the United States and what's going on down there wasn't a factor at all. So I think that's the biggest difference this election, that I did hear that at the doors. It was something that I did my best to counter that message, because I was still in the Canadian Armed Forces during President Trump's first mandate. I was actually in Baghdad, Iraq, working for the U.S.-led coalition. So I have my own perspective that regardless of who the Prime Minister of Canada is, dealing with Mr. Trump is somewhat chaotic and unpredictable. And so that cup of water could be the Prime Minister of Canada, and I'm not sure the actual individual is going to have that big of an impact. I think it's more about what the actual policies and the strengths that we have in Canada, and it's really about having a strong Canadian economy, and dealing with a position of strength is the best way to deal with our greatest friend and greatest ally in the United States. But at the same time, if we want to diversify and become less dependent on them, so we have a bit more flexibility when whatever administration's in power. And I would argue that over the last 15, 20 years, the U.S. has actually taken on a bit more of a protectionist viewpoint when it comes to their role in the world stage, and in particular when it comes to domestic manufacturing and trade. So this is something that, regardless of which parties has the privilege of being in government, there needs to be, Canada needs to sort of wake up and give ourselves more flexibility.
Absolutely, and I mean, that's something that that has been the narrative, and that's been the main issue over the past number of months, with multiple elections happening in both in Canada we've had few elections at this point now, and that is the discussion. And we'll go back to that a little later, but I want to talk about you coming back to Ottawa for the third time now. So you're bringing the voices, and I looked at the stats, and so you won with 52% this time, so a majority. So congratulations on that, and you increased your vote share each time. 49 in 2021 and 46 in 2019, about that. So what does that tell you about the needs of your riding and what you're bringing their voices to Ottawa at this time, that they've returned you consecutively higher each time?
Well, first off, I'd offer what that tells me. If I'm only increasing by 3% every election, I have 16 more elections to go to get to 100%. So that's what we'll strive for. I don't know if I'll live long enough for 16 more elections, but we'll see what happens. I am committed, and I've already said quite clearly to my constituents that my name will be on the ballot whenever the next federal election, and so I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. I think it just speaks to a few things. One, the message that the party, has been pushing out, and under Mr. Poilievre over the last 3 years, one of hope and unity and the strength of growing the Canadian economy into the future. And I think that's why, in particular, I was, somewhat surprised, but at the same time, not, but very happy to have the youth in my riding. As soon as they realized I was a Conservative candidate at the door, that absolutely they were voting. I think there was one youth I talked to in the thousands of doors that I knocked at that didn't indicate quite clearly that they were voting for me. Number two, I think it just speaks to the fact that I actually believe that elected officials' primary role is to listen to their constituents. And you can't do your job, and that's regardless if you're elected at the municipal or provincial level or the federal level. Your job is to listen, and you can't represent the people unless you listen. And number three, I come from a riding where my loyalty is absolutely number one with Canada, but with the people first, and with my constituents even before the party. And I'm not afraid to make sure I'm representing their voice, and sometimes that even means that I've voted contrary to the majority of my Conservative colleagues. But at the same time, I'm always a team player. None of it's ever a surprise. I always stand up in caucus and share my viewpoints. And I'll give one example. In this last Parliament, motion 86 was a motion by former NDP MP Lisa Marie Barron on forming a citizens' assembly to study electoral reform, and then make recommendations to the government. Honestly think she would have had 100% of Conservative MPs voting in favor of it, not just myself, and it was actually MPs John Nader and Ben Lobb. So kind of interesting that 3 Conservatives have voted in support of it. All come from that same sort of mid-southwestern part of Ontario. However, ultimately what I did was I actually, in line with our Conservative Party of Canada's policy declaration, it states that we support electoral reform. However, any changes must be done through referendum. Well, I actually conducted a mini referendum, put it out in a household or a survey to all households in my riding, and when 87% of them say vote for this motion, I voted for it. The second piece of advice I actually gave to Ms. Barron after the fact was the preamble in it that basically said all MPs are corrupt and dumb. If you want people to support it, you should actually, you don't need to, sort of beat up on them. And so ultimately, I'm just a big believer that, you represent the people first. So I think that speaks a little bit to why I got reelected. And the other factor that I would just add in is I'm blessed to have, likely the smartest decision I've done since I've been elected was to hire really good people, really good staff that work day in and day out for the people of Bruce Grey, Owen Sound, and that makes a big difference too.
Absolutely, and that was really interesting what you're talking about, and that's something that I think a lot of Canadians are seeing, kind of expecting, especially in this new parliament, and we're talking about facing these threats from the United States and this big thing that is happening, and with this parliament that is so close and such a close election, I know that I was really paying attention on election night. There was a lot of close moments there. And sort of when you're coming back now to Parliament, how are you going to fulfill those expectations that I think Canadians, your constituents, have to work with one another, as well as representing that large voice of people that, like you were saying, the youth that overwhelmingly voted Conservative, and the people across the country that did vote in historic numbers for the Conservative Party. How do you plan on, or what would you like to see in bringing those two sides together?
Well, I mean, we're unique here in Canada too, in that, not unique, but with our Westminster system, different than our southern neighbors. You don't get to vote for the Prime Minister, you only get to vote for your local MP. So I'm a big believer in, ultimately, whichever party has the privilege of forming government, you need to elect the most MPs. So I'll continue to do my job and be that voice so that I can hopefully continue to earn that trust and from the people of Bruce Grey and Owen Sound. On the other side is I just try to provide that voice when I'm working with my colleagues here in the Conservative Party, or even across the aisle with other opposition members or backbench MPs, that aren't in the government on the Liberal side, and even the ministers. Politics is a lot about relationships and trying to convince people, that's what leadership is too, of influencing them to do ultimately what you think is the best way forward. So I think ultimately, it's going to be a little unique. It always is after every election, because regardless of what party you're in, parliamentarians understand that the people have just spoken. It doesn't mean that we're going to support everything that the Liberal government puts forward. We're going to continue to do our job as His Majesty's loyal opposition to hold the government to account, to deliver on the legislation it's best for all Canadians, but make sure it's considering that that it is good for everybody, not just certain demographics or portions or regions of the country. That being said, what's unique, and I think if you were to go review my press release and my interviews that I did with media on election night, I talked about how humbling it is to have the privilege of being reelected and get that majority mandate. Obviously disappointed with the overall results, but I'm firmly committed, I think that, and believe that part of the reason the Liberals were successful in getting reelected for a fourth mandate is that they basically turned 180 and ran on a lot of conservative and copied a lot of the conservative platform. So ultimately, I believe, I will hold them to account to deliver on those conservative promises that the Liberal government made. And I think there is that unique spot that we can see, and we've already seen it with some of the legislation that's been tabled. Some of it doesn't go near far enough for what we need to do to get our economy growing so that it is setting up success for the youth of Canada, especially to be able to afford a house, get a good job, and be able to raise a family. At the same time, making sure that they're not overreaching in some cases when it comes to protecting Canadians' rights, etc. So we'll see how it all comes to play in the coming weeks. I mean, it's still early days, and we'll see how the rest of this week goes, and we'll see if the government actually, interesting enough, as you're well aware, we've had the speech from the Fromm votes. Majority of MPs voted to amend it to have the government actually table a budget. I have a feeling Mr. Carney and the Liberal government won't do that until the fall. So, it's not a good, if he chooses not to, it's maybe indicative that despite the Prime Minister having changed, that the Liberal government really hasn't changed its spots.
Yeah, and that is what we're seeing now in you as a parliamentarian and your colleagues. Like you were saying, there was a lot of appearance of change. It's a matter of seeing if that is actually real change or if that is an appearance. So I want to shift gears a bit now because I love your story. I love talking with you about your story, though, when your time in service, then coming into politics, and how you did that in a rapid time. So I want to talk a bit about talking about veterans, talking about it, and we saw yeah, we're getting to they're changing up apparently we're getting to our 2% targets for NATO targets. So actually, I'll just ask you a bit about that now. So at the time of this filming, it was yesterday that the Prime Minister announced that we're going to be getting to our 2% NATO targets. So on that sort of plan, I know that it's early still and all the details haven't been announced, but from what you've seen so far, are you able to speak a bit about what you've seen so far?
Look, and I had the privilege last week of traveling to Brussels to NATO with the Minister of National Defence, although I wasn't at the same meetings as him, and it was great from reconnecting with a lot of my former colleagues that I had the pleasure of serving with during my 25-and-a-half-year career in the military. The first thing why it's so important that the government and that Canada gets to our 2% of GDP is the world's more volatile than in my lifetime. And, I'm 51 years old. It is that, and, been all over the globe, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq. It's more volatile than it has ever been. And it's for a number of reasons due to decisions by the U.S. But ultimately, when you see what Russia and Mr. Putin's done with their illegal invasion of Ukraine, what China's doing, and I think it's just a question of when, not if, they go after Taiwan. And so there's North Korea's development, Iranian influence in the Middle East, and continuing to do what they're doing to sow discontent and support for the terrorist organizations there. So it's complicated and it's volatile. And with the U.S. pulling back, the Europeans get it. I mean, I got that in spades from, I met with Finnish delegation, Ukrainians, a bunch of the European nations, and they fully understand the threat that they're facing, they broadened. I know we had a discussion with this a few years ago about the idea of mandatory service, and I'm not suggesting that from a military, but that's actually what a number of the European countries have brought back. So the point is, we need to reinvest in our Canadian Armed Forces. The last decade, the Liberals have said the right things, but they actually haven't demonstrated it with continued, cuts. They announce increased funding, but then they pull it back at the same time. But we need the people. So my biggest concern with them, and I mean, look, I'm supportive of the idea of getting there much faster. My biggest question, in 9 months, are they going to spend these billions of dollars that they've just basically announced and do it in a transparent manner at the same time? Because again, it goes back to what we just talked about a little bit earlier. Where's the budget? It's great that they've made an announcement, but what's the actual plan, and how is it going to be out there so that we can increase that support for Canadian Armed Forces? So, I'm optimistic on one side, glad to see that the Liberals finally taking a step forward, but I'm somewhat pessimistic on their ability to actually deliver upon it to the same extent. So, but ultimately the message out there for all your viewers is, do your research, understand that the world is more volatile than ever, and you need to get engaged. And at the same time, it means Canada's signed on to this. NATO's already, committed to going back into this true mandate that the NATO alliance has always been behind, which is that deterrence role against aggressors, in particular Russia. But what was different when, even though it was a NATO mission when I was in Afghanistan, at the tactical level, we could make decisions to minimize risk. When your role is to defend every inch of NATO territory from a potential peer enemy, it won't be 158 Canadian casualties. We'll be lucky if that's just one morning, if actually conflict comes to. So I think there's an understanding that needs to be clear to Canadians that the world is volatile, but we have to prepare ourselves from a social resilience perspective for that potential future conflict, because the best way to deter it is to actually be ready and show that demonstration of will, so that enemies and potential adversaries like Russia, like China, like North Korea, like Iran, understand it's not going to be a cakewalk. And to be frank, the Russians are already good. They've taken 1 million casualties over the last few years. you don't see their society batting an eye about that, really, and so ultimately, if we took 1 million casualties in Canada, or even a few 100,000, I don't know if Canadians are there, and I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I'm just trying to make sure your viewers understand that the world is complicated. The world is more volatile than it has ever been. So on the defense side, I'll leave my comments there.
Yeah, and that is something that that I always enjoy your insight on, and especially now, we're in an atmosphere where Canadians are paying a lot more attention to this sort of thing, whether it's the direct comments of the president, and which has fueled Canadian patriotism to levels that I haven't seen in my lifetime, and maybe have only been seen to the degree during the referendums, the independence referendums in Quebec, and even at that, we're just at such record levels of patriotism and discussion about that. So I think that's something that a lot of people are thinking about, and it'll be interesting. You mentioned our discussion a couple of years back about, what would a world look like where Canada has, required basic 6-week training, and maybe not like that, but just a matter of, are people willing to step up and defend their country as they have been over the past few months in word, but are they willing? So it's really interesting.
So I think they are ultimately, like, likely in your lifetime, maybe just not in your memory, but during the Afghanistan conflict, in the that 2005 or even post 9/11, but really when Canada got fully involved in sort of in a much more committed way from around 2006 to about 2014, we actually had no problem getting people coming to the door. Young people are patriotic, so you did see that a lot. The challenge, and this gets to really where you were starting the conversation about our veterans, is we've got to make sure we take care of those that choose to put on the uniform and make potentially the ultimate sacrifice. Because if we're gonna, as I mentioned, if the situation has changed where the number of potential casualties and wounded that we could be dealing with, if those people don't feel like they're being supported, and more so that their families will be supported after the fact, it's really hard to convince somebody to ultimately make that decision and sacrifice. So especially to attract them there to join the Canadian Air Force in the first place. So I think there's more that can be done there, and to understand the mental health impacts of all of this. In fact, just yesterday, myself and Senator Rebecca Patterson, retired Rear Admiral, just hosted the 12th annual Sam Sharp breakfast on the Honorable Aaron O'Toole and the Honorable Romeo Dallaire had started 12 years ago, dealing with veterans' mental health, and it's a great opportunity. So we had over 150 people there yesterday morning again, and hearing we always bring in a guest speaker, recently retired Rear Admiral Chris Sutherland, he was the Deputy Commander of the Royal Canadian Navy, to speak about his own troubles, not from a post-traumatic stress perspective, but the impact that service has had on his addiction challenges with alcohol and with mental health and depression, and which actually impacts Canadians right across the forefront. The point is that we got to take care of ourselves. We got to have the programs in place within the service itself and post service, because if we want Canadians to step up the forefront, they can't be forgotten afterwards. So I'm committed 100% to continue to be that voice, and to do what I can to continue to influence parliamentarians.
And on that point now, sort of my final question here is about the Sport Canada's veterans, and I know you've always been a voice for that, being a veteran yourself, and sort of to discuss about if you were to say to the government, and whether they came to ask you to work with them or just give some advice to them, what would you say would be the most impactful thing the government can do to help support our veterans, especially ones that have maybe felt a little behind or left behind in the past decade? What would you say? What would your message be in order to support them?
So you got to be transparent, and you got to be timely, and you got to simplify the process. I think, and to be fair to the government, they've talked about doing this, the need to transition from the Canadian Armed Forces out, that you still need to have medical support. Like, I don't have a family doctor. Now, my parents don't have a family doctor, and they're in their late 79 and 78 years old. I refuse to put my name even on a list. So we need to address that shortage. We don't have time in this interview to get into some of those discussions, but my point is that's an essential thing for the military and their families, especially the veterans that are dealing with issues, whether it's physical or mental. They need to have that support. So lining that up, this idea of having to re-demonstrate the injury that you were potentially released from the Canadian Armed Forces for, whether it's mentally or physically, and then you get out and to have to prove that to VAC, is absurd in my viewpoint. So the government needs to streamline that process. They need to make it less complicated, especially for those dealing with mental health issues, because the last thing they need to do is talk to a bureaucrat. And so I think there's actually, when they've tried, there's challenges with it, but for those that maybe are dealing with physical concerns or mental health concerns, that they're still able to work, hiring more of those veterans into Veterans Affairs Canada is, to me, a good thing, because they at least understand it. But you got to balance that too, so you're not actually, if they're dealing with issues, that you're not actually exacerbating their own challenges. So I think the big thing is the time thing. Nothing drives soldiers are used to the hurry up and wait model, right? Or model, where you're all ready to go to whatever operation, and then you're sitting in the waiting area. You're sitting on the bus or the plane or on the tarmac just waiting to go, but we're always prepared ahead of time. But if that doesn't work when it comes to personal administration, and especially for those veterans that are dealing with the mental health issues, nothing frustrates them more if they can't even get a response back. So it's my biggest criticism of one of my biggest criticisms of this Liberal government is they keep hiring more bureaucrats, but by all metrics, service actually gets down because it just adds more steps into the process. You have to simplify everything when it comes to bureaucracy in the federal government, and this is in particular important to Veterans Affairs. So that's one or two recommendations on what I think the government could do better to help our veterans.
Well, I thank you for that. It's always, I always enjoy hearing, what can be done, especially when people like yourself, or, my counselor and your friend, Counselor Hill, sort of on the local level, I've been able to have discussions with him about it, and just sort of, bringing in those voices and making those recommendations, those suggestions. I really appreciate it. So that's sort of where I have it for questions today. I really thank you for your conversation. Thanks for having me here. And I always like to end giving the last word to the to my guests. So if there's anything else you wanted to mention or anything else, I want to give you the last word.
My last word is continue to do what you're doing. I think all Canadians can do a better job, or can reach out to whatever level of elected official there is. We can't do our jobs, as I started with the feedback. Now, criticism is fine. If it's constructive criticism, it's even better. And I think we just need to, concentrate on that a little bit more, because especially the youth have to understand that if they want to change things, they got to get out of the vote. I would argue this last election's overall result was there were people that came out and voted across all the demographics. And in fact, I was somewhat optimistic to see that, I think nationally we were closer to 70% this year. I know I was over 70% in my riding. If you don't vote, you shouldn't complain. And ultimately, there's so many countries and citizens around the world that don't have that privilege that we have in Canada. So I just encourage people to stay engaged in the process, learn about it, and understand what the issues are. And when you have a concern over something, that whatever level of government's bringing forward, that you actually engage in the process, because it's really difficult to do your job as an elected official if you're just doing it on your own, and it's a lot easier to do it when we have that feedback.
Well, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it, and these discussions are always great, not just for myself but for the people that watch them, and whether it's they're watching the whole video or just scrolling through TikTok and seeing, or scrolling through Instagram or something like that and seeing a clip of you talking about something. These discussions are so helpful, and like you said, getting involved, and especially for the youth, that's something I've always looked at and been really interested in, and try to spur that youth engagement. So thank you, MP Ruff, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. So this is Vincenzo Calla for VCalla Productions, signing out. Thank you.
Thanks for watching today's episode of the VCalla Show. To find more conversations like this, subscribe to VCalla Productions on YouTube, follow at VC Productions 25 on all of the social media channels, and visit vcallaproductions.ca, where you can also join my mailing list. So that's all for today, and I will catch you in the next video.